The fluorescent lights of Marcus's high school bathroom hummed their usual industrial song, the same song they'd hummed for 4 years, while he stared at his reflection and wondered when his face would stop looking so scared. Today was no different, except today he was filming. His phone trembled in his grip. The camera was pointed at his own eyes, and those eyes looked hollow, the way his mother's looked when she thought he was sleeping. Marcus had practiced this 3 times in the shower, 4 times in the stairwell. Now it was real. "My name is Marcus Chen," he started, his voice cracking on the second word. He cleared his throat, tried again. "I'm 16, my dad died 14 months ago. Medical debt, funeral costs, my mom—" His jaw tightened. He could see her there, even without looking. Hands deep in dishwater, feet swollen, smile forced when she came home at midnight. "She works at Rosie's diner. Mornings and nights. And I'm begging, anyone who needs work done. Yard work, painting, washing cars, moving stuff, anything. I'm strong, I'm reliable. I won't waste your time. I just need to help her." He held the phone steady for 3 more seconds, long enough for the camera to catch the fluorescent light reflecting off his eyes, long enough to capture the weight of it all. Then he hit upload. Marcus didn't expect much. Maybe a few replies from neighbors. Maybe Mrs. Patterson down the street would finally let him rake her leaves. He posted it to his school's local Facebook group, to Instagram, to TikTok with 0 followers. He was just a kid in a bathroom after all, nobody special, but the algorithm has no mercy. The algorithm has no heart, but it does have hunger. 47 minutes later, the post had 6,000 views. By the time Marcus made it to his last class, it had 30,000. By dinner, it had 120,000. Comments poured in, some mean, some beautiful. Most just confused. Why is this going viral? Is this a scam? This is a scam. But mixed between the noise were the real ones. "God bless you, kid, I'll hire you. Where do you live?" This broke my heart. Marcus didn't know it yet, but his desperation had struck something primal in people. It was raw, unfiltered. It didn't perform struggle, it lived it. 200 miles away, in a garage that smelled like motor oil and memory, Miguel Ripa Valdez was scrolling through Facebook while his crew worked on a 1989 Harley. One of the prospects showed him the video. Ripa watched it twice. The third time, he didn't watch the whole thing. He stopped halfway through because he'd seen enough. He'd seen the face of a kid who didn't know what grief looked like until it moved into his house. He'd seen the posture of someone carrying weight that wasn't designed for his shoulders. He'd seen Marcus Chen's father, James Chen, in that kid's eyes. If you haven't seen the video yet, go back to the beginning. This moment matters. Reaper set down his phone. He was 52 years old, 6'3", with scars from places he didn't talk about, and a bike that could outrun most people's regrets. He had one tattoo on his chest, James Chen, never forgotten. Below it, a date, Desert Storm, 1994. 28 years ago, James had pulled Reaper from a burning transport truck in Kuwait. They'd served together for 7 months after that. They'd written letters home together. They'd talked about the future. James would go back to the States, marry a girl named Lynn, have kids, build something real. Reaper would. Well, Reaper didn't know then. He was too angry, too full of adrenaline and purpose. When the deployment ended, they exchanged phone numbers and made a promise neither quite believed. Stay in touch. They didn't. Life happened. Reaper went back to his own wars, personal ones, the kind that don't end with ceremonies. He'd heard through a mutual friend years later that James had gotten married, had a kid. had a good life. And then, 3 years ago, Reaper saw a mutual connection share a link. James Chen, 1968-2023. He'd meant to reach out to Lynn. He'd picked up his phone 100 times. But how do you call a widow you've never met and say, "Your husband saved my life once, and I'm sorry I wasn't there to tell him that when it mattered"? Now, looking at this kid's face, at Marcus's face, Reaper understood something older than words. The debt had found him, time had circled back, and the promise he'd made to James Chen in the sand was finally due. Reaper stood up. The garage got quiet. His crew, 32 bikers, brothers and sisters of the road, people who'd learned to read his silence, all looked at him at once. "Get on your phones," Reaper said, his voice the kind of quiet that carries weight. "Call everyone. Tell them we've got work to do. Text them this video, and tell them to bring their friends." Within 3 hours, Reaper had made 67 calls. Within 6 hours, he'd sent emails to chapters in 3 states. Within 9 hours, bikers were making plans. By midnight, 73 riders had confirmed, "We're in." Nobody asked why. They didn't need to. They'd learned, over years of leather and loyalty, that when Reaper called, it was because something mattered. And when something mattered to Reaper, it mattered to all of them. The next morning, Marcus woke to his phone exploding. Not metaphorically, it had actually overheated and shut down. When he powered it back on, it took 5 full minutes for the notifications to load. Job offers, interview requests, local news outlets, a restaurant owner wanting to sponsor him, a construction company looking to hire, 234 comments just since midnight. His mother was already at work. She'd left a note. "Breakfast in the fridge. Don't be late for school." She hadn't seen the video yet. She worked at a diner where nobody had time to scroll through their phones, where the shift was wall-to-wall chaos from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. And then she'd shower and go to her evening job at a hotel, cleaning rooms until midnight. She existed in these pockets of time between responsibilities, too tired to look at screens. Marcus didn't go to school. He sat on his bed, staring at the numbers climbing higher, and felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't real. This was the internet being kind for 5 minutes before it moved on to the next tragedy, the next heartbreak, the next kid begging for help. Around noon, there was a knock at the apartment door. Not the regular knock of a neighbor or delivery person. This was a knock, heavy and deliberate, the kind that made the whole frame vibrate. Marcus opened it to find a man the size of a doorway, covered in tattoos, wearing a cut with patches from places Marcus had never heard of. Behind him, visible through the stairwell, were more of them. Lots more. "Marcus Chen?" the man asked. His voice was gravel and smoke. Marcus nodded, suddenly aware that he was wearing a hoodie with a stain on it and his hair was a mess. "I'm Miguel Valdez. My crew calls me Reaper. Your dad saved my life a long time ago. I'm here to make good on a promise." He extended a hand the size of a catcher's mitt. "And we're here to help you help your mom." Marcus shook his hand, and it felt like holding on to something real for the first time in months. By that afternoon, 73 bikers had descended on the city like an organized storm. They had a plan. Reaper had sketched it out that morning on napkins and scraps of paper, and his crew had spread the word through encrypted group chats and phone calls. The mission was simple: work for Marcus. They fanned out across the neighborhood in groups of 3 and 4. They knocked on doors, introduced themselves and offered services: yard work, fence repair, gutter cleaning, driveway sealing, car washing, house painting. They were polite, they were professional, they were impossible to refuse, partly because the work was meticulous and cheap, but mostly because showing up at someone's door and saying, "We're here to help," carries a weight that transcends price negotiation. Within hours, jobs were being arranged. A retired couple agreed to have their entire fence replaced. A widow wanted her house painted, something she'd been putting off for 3 years. A small business owner asked if they could help renovate his storefront. The work poured in like rain. By sundown, Marcus had earned 2,847. By the second day, that number had doubled. By the end of the week, local news stations had picked up the story. Mystery bikers descend on city, work for teen helping widow mom. But it wasn't a mystery. It was a code, one as old as leather and loyalty, one that said, if you make a promise, you keep it. If you lose someone, you protect their family. If you see someone drowning, you throw them a rope. Reaper knew this code. His crew lived it. What they didn't know yet was that the world was watching. And the world, when it sees genuine goodness moving through a cynical landscape, tends to lean in, to amplify, to answer back. The video of Marcus's desperate plea had been shared 847,000 times. News crews were setting up at the garage. People were calling in, asking to join, to help, to be part of something that felt true in an era of performance and fakeness. By the morning of day 4, 73 had become 211. Bikers from neighboring states had ridden through the night. Car clubs had shown up. Firefighters on their days off. Military veterans. Construction crews. Nurses from the hospital. Teachers from schools. Mechanics and electricians and contractors. All of them responding to something primal in the story. They came because the story was real. Not scripted. Not performed. Not engineered by algorithms. A kid had asked for work. A man had remembered a promise made in blood and sand. And that promise had rippled outward, and the ripple had become a wave. Marcus's mother, Lin Chen, had finally seen the video on the morning of day 3. She'd been on her 15-minute break at the diner, sitting in the back office, when a regular customer thrust a phone in front of her face and said, "That's your kid." She'd watched her son's face on that tiny screen, watched him asking for work, asking for a chance, asking for help, and she'd cried in a way she hadn't cried since the funeral. Not sad crying, something else, something like relief, mixed with terror, mixed with awe. She'd called Marcus. He'd tried to explain, but there weren't words for it yet. So instead, he picked her up from the diner that afternoon and drove her to the neighborhood where the work was happening. She stood on a quiet street and watched, as 200 people worked on various properties. Some were painting Mrs. Patterson's fence, others were cleaning gutters. A crew of 6 was completely renovating Mr. Ortiz's driveway. And in the center of it all was Reaper, directing traffic, checking quality, shaking hands, and occasionally pausing to look at Marcus with an expression that contained years of grief and relief, and the particular satisfaction of a kept promise. Lynn approached him slowly, like approaching something that might disappear if she moved too fast. "You're Miguel," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am," Reaper replied. He removed his sunglasses. His eyes were kind and ancient and sad in a way that only people who'd carried too much weight can look. "James talked about you," Lynn said. After he came home, he said you were the best man he'd ever known. He said if he ever got the chance, he'd pay you back. He never did get the chance. Reaper's jaw tightened. He saved my life, he said simply. That debt doesn't expire, and neither do promises. They stood in silence for a moment, this woman who'd been widowed by the universe, and this man who'd been waiting 14 years to settle a score with fate. I don't know how to thank you, Lynn said finally. You already did, Reaper replied, by raising him right, by showing him what it means to keep going. He gestured to Marcus, who was across the street, helping a crew install new fence posts. That kid's got character, that's James in him, that's you in him. I'm just here to remind him that he's not alone, that his father's life meant something, that promises matter. By sunset on day 4, every job in the neighborhood had been completed or scheduled. A local construction company had donated materials. The hardware store had given a discount. The tire shop had given free rotations to anyone who showed up. It was as if the entire city had decided that this one act of goodness was worth joining. The news crews were filming constantly now, historic showing of community support. Local teens' plea for work sparks response from hundreds, but the real story, the story that mattered, wasn't the numbers, it was the protocol. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. On the 5th day, Lin Chen locked the diner for the first time in 2 years. She left a note in the window, closed for family emergency. Will reopen Monday. Her boss would be furious. She didn't care. Instead, she spent the day in her apartment, the small, cramped space that had been her fortress and her prison. And she opened her doors. Reaper and 3 of his crew sat at her kitchen table. They brought coffee and pastries and the particular kind of ease that comes from people who understand loss without needing it explained. Your husband, Reaper began, talked a lot about what he wanted for his family. After he came home from deployment, he was different, quieter, but clearer, like he'd been shaken down to what actually mattered. Reaper held a cup of coffee, his huge hands making it look like a thimble. He said if he ever had kids, he wanted them to understand 3 things. Work means something, loyalty means everything, and you never forget who helped you when you were on your knees. Lynn listened. She'd heard some of this, James telling her late at night, but hearing it now from this stranger, this man her husband had loved like a brother, made it real in a new way. Marcus has all of that, Reaper continued. I can see it. He's got James's backbone. One of Reaper's crew, a woman with grey streaks in her hair and the posture of someone who'd survived hard things, leaned forward. The money we're helping him earn, that's not charity. It's work. He's doing real jobs. He's earning real wages. You understand? He's not being pitied, he's being recognized. Lynn understood. She'd been terrified that this was charity, that her son would be diminished by it. But watching the work happen, watching Marcus come home each day with dirt under his fingernails and genuine exhaustion and pride in his eyes, she understood. This wasn't pity. This was acknowledgement. This was community saying, you matter. Your struggle matters. Your effort matters. By the end of the first week, Marcus had earned $8,900. By the end of the second week, that number had nearly tripled. Job offers kept coming. A local college had reached out about scholarships. A trade school wanted to fast-track him into their programs. Companies wanted to hire him. The internet had taken a narrative of desperation and turned it into a narrative of possibility. But here's what most people didn't understand. The money wasn't the real gift. The real gift was what had been missing since James Chen died. The real gift was the presence of men and women who said, through their actions and their consistency, "We see you. We remember him. We're here." The real gift was Marcus coming home and finding Reaper on the porch, or stopping by the garage to help work on bikes, or sitting with people who understood that grief doesn't follow a timeline. The real gift was family that hadn't been born into, but had been chosen. On night 14, Marcus and Reaper sat on the roof of the apartment building, looking out over the city. Marcus had a blanket around his shoulders. Reaper had a beer, and the kind of patience that comes from lifetimes lived in silence. "Why did you really come?" Marcus asked. He'd asked before, but he was asking again, because this time he had the courage to ask with his full heart, instead of just his confusion. Reaper took a long time answering. The city hummed beneath them. Somewhere, a siren wailed. Somewhere else, someone laughed. "Because I was supposed to," Reaper finally said. 28 years ago, your dad pulled me out of a truck that was burning. I was pinned, I was done, and he came back in, even though he knew the risks, even though he knew it might kill him. And he got me out." Reaper paused. "I've had 28 years to think about what I would have owed him. I didn't know how to pay it, but I made a promise that day, even if I never said it out loud. I promised that if he ever needed me, I would show up. And now..." He gestured to the city, to the weeks of work and presence and loyalty that had poured out like light. "Now I get to keep that promise. Not to him, he's gone, but to his son, to his wife, to the thing he built that's still standing." Reaper turned to look at Marcus directly. "You understand, this isn't me being nice. This is me settling a debt with God. This is me keeping my word." Marcus didn't fully understand it yet. He was 16, and understanding something like that takes decades of living. But he understood enough. He understood that he was part of something bigger than himself, that his father's life had mattered enough that it was still rippling outward, still changing things, still pulling people toward goodness. "What happens when the jobs run out?" Marcus asked quietly. "They won't," Reaper said. "Not really. There's always work for someone willing to do it. But more than that..." He looked back at the city. "You're part of the crew now, if you want to be. This isn't temporary. This is what family does." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Family. Not the family of blood and genetics, but the family of choice. The family that shows up when things are hard. The family that remembers promises made in deserts decades ago. "I want to be," Marcus said. By week 3, the story had been covered by major news outlets. Teens' desperate video sparks, historic community response, how 700-plus volunteers changed one family's life. Podcasts wanted interviews. A production company wanted to make a documentary. Local politicians wanted to pose with Marcus for photo opportunities. But something unexpected happened. The story didn't become about the numbers or the spectacle. It became about the code. News organizations started doing deeper dives. They interviewed Marcus and Lynn. They interviewed Reaper and his crew. And slowly, the real narrative emerged. This wasn't a viral moment. This was a promise. This was what happened when people took their word seriously. This was what community actually looked like. Schools started showing the story to their students. This is what loyalty means. This is what it looks like to keep a promise. This is what it means to show up for people. The narrative shifted from, look at this amazing, heartwarming thing, to look at what we could be if we all took responsibility seriously. Marcus became something he never expected to become, a symbol. Not because he'd done anything spectacular, but because he'd been honest, and that honesty had cracked something open in people. Lynn finally took a day off that didn't involve medical emergencies. She took Marcus to the beach. They sat and watched the water and didn't talk much, because they didn't need to. They understood each other now in a new way, not just as mother and son, but as survivors who'd been given a second chance, as people who'd been remembered. Please like this if you believe in keeping promises, if you believe that loyalty matters, if you believe that showing up for people is what actually makes the world better. Like this if you're watching for a reason. 6 weeks in, Marcus walked into Reaper's garage with a proposition. He'd been saving his earnings, keeping a portion separate even as the jobs kept coming. He'd figured out what he wanted to do with it. "I want a tattoo," he said simply. Reaper looked at him for a long moment. Marcus was taller now, or maybe he just carried himself differently. His face had changed, less desperate, more solid, more like a young man becoming who he was supposed to be. "Your father's name?" Reaper asked. "Yeah, with the dates. And a gear like the one in your garage, the one Dad and you worked on together." Reaper nodded. He called his tattoo artist, a woman named Sasha, who'd been part of the crew from day 2, a former army medic with hands that could create art on skin. Within an hour, Marcus was in the chair, and Sasha was sketching the design. James Chen, 1968-2023. A gear, intricate and perfect, with a small desert landscape worked into it. Underneath, 2 coordinates, the place in Kuwait where Reaper had been pulled from the burning truck. As Sasha worked, Reaper sat beside the chair and talked. He talked about James, about their days in the desert, about the conversations they'd had under stars, in places most people would never see, about the brother he'd lost without ever getting to say goodbye. By the time it was finished, Marcus had tears running down his face, not from pain, but from something larger, something like inheritance, something like connection to a man he'd known for only the first 14 years of his life, but would now carry with him forever. When Marcus left the garage that night, the tattoo wrapped and tender, he felt different. He felt like he'd crossed a threshold. He wasn't just a kid working to help his mom anymore. He was part of a lineage. He was part of something that stretched backward to deserts and forward to futures yet unmade. By month 2, Marcus had worked alongside nearly 400 different people. Construction workers, electricians, lawyers, nurses, teachers, retired military, business owners, each one with their own story, their own reasons for showing up, and each one with something to teach. A retired carpenter named Robert showed him how to build something that would last, how to respect materials, how to take time, how not to rush quality. A nurse named Diana talked to him about showing up even when you're tired, about the value of presence. A teacher named Mr. Jacobson asked him to think about what he wanted to be, not as a job but as a person. What kind of man did he want to become? Marcus started keeping a journal, something Reaper had suggested. Not a diary of feelings, but a record of lessons, of skills learned, of people who'd mattered, of promises made and promises kept. He wrote, Day 47, learned how to repair a transmission. Robert said it's not just mechanical. It's about understanding how pieces work together, how each part has a job and needs to do it well, or the whole thing fails. Said that's how families work too. Day 52. Diana talked about her husband who died 10 years ago. She volunteered with us because James's story reminded her that good things can come from loyalty, that remembering people matters. Day 61. Mr. Jacobson asked what I want to study. I don't know yet, but I know I want to help people. I know I want to be someone who shows up. I know I want to be like Reaper, someone who keeps his promises. The world kept watching, articles kept publishing, how one biker's promise built a community. The teen who changed his city by asking for help, what loyalty really looks like. But Marcus was learning to tune out the noise. The real story wasn't the headlines. The real story was in the quiet moments, in learning to use tools, in hearing people's stories, in understanding that every person who'd shown up had done it because they believed in something, in honor, in loyalty, in the power of keeping your word. On day 90, Marcus woke at 5:47 a.m. to the sound of garbage trucks rumbling down the street below. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the city was already breathing. That early morning rhythm of delivery drivers and night shift workers heading home, and people with nowhere else to be starting their days. He lay in bed for a moment, listening. The apartment was quiet in a way it hadn't been 3 months ago. No desperation humming through the walls. No his mother crying softly in the next room when she thought he was asleep. No wondering if the rent would get paid. Marcus got up and moved to the window. The neighborhood looked the same as it always had. The laundromat across the street, the bodega on the corner with its flickering neon sign still glowing in the pre-dawn darkness. The rows of attached houses with their small yards and smaller dreams. But it wasn't the same. The energy had changed. The feeling had changed. He could see the marks of the work everywhere. Mrs. Patterson's fence, pristine white and straight as truth. Mr. Ortiz's driveway, smooth and dark and perfect. The Henderson house with its fresh coat of paint. The trim work, precise and clean. These weren't just repairs. They were declarations. They were proof that people had been here, that they'd cared enough to do the work right. Marcus showered and got dressed quietly, not wanting to wake his mother. She'd been working until 10 p.m. the night before at the catering company, a real job now, with benefits and reasonable hours and people who respected her. She needed sleep more than anything else in the world. He left a note on the kitchen counter, out to the garage, back by dinner. Love, M. The streets were still mostly empty at 6:15 a.m. Marcus walked them like he owned them, because in a way he did. Every corner had a memory now. The corner store where he'd stopped to buy water on day 3. The park where he'd sat with Reaper and talked about James. The intersection where the local news team had first filmed him. These places had become sacred simply because his life had changed on them. The garage was already open when he arrived. Reaper was there. He was always there, living in an apartment above the shop. His life organized around the work, and he was drinking coffee from a chipped mug, standing in front of a 1976 Harley Davidson that had been a project for the past 2 weeks. Couldn't sleep either, Marcus asked. Reaper looked up and smiled. There was something different about his face lately. The tension that had lived there for years, the weight of a promise not yet kept, had softened. Not disappeared entirely, but softened into something like peace. Your old man used to wake up early, Reaper said, gesturing for Marcus to come stand beside him. Even after deployment, even after he came home and everything was supposed to be normal, He'd be up before dawn. He said the quiet meant he could think, could remember without all the noise getting in the way. Marcus stood beside the motorcycle. He was learning to read these machines now, to understand the language of cylinders and timing and balance. The Harley in front of him was partly dismantled, engine exposed, chrome gleaming under the fluorescent lights. It looked like a skeleton of itself. "You hungry?" Reaper asked. "Starving." "Come on. Diana's working the morning shift at the diner. She always keeps the good pastries for when we show up." They walked to Rosie's diner together, Reaper moving with the particular ease of someone who'd made peace with his own history. Diana was there, just as Reaper had promised, and she had 2 plates of scrambled eggs and toast ready before they'd even sat down. She knew their routine now. She knew that Marcus took coffee with a lot of cream, and that Reaper took his black, and that they both preferred to sit in the booth by the window. "Your mum's still asleep?" Diana asked, refilling their coffee cups without being asked. "Yeah, she had a late night," Marcus said. Diana smiled. She was in her late 60s, with the kind of weathered beauty that only comes from years of showing up for people. That's good. She needed to rest. Lynn's been carrying too much weight for too long. Diana paused, and there was something tender in her expression. "Your father would be proud of both of you. I never knew him, but I've heard the stories. A good man. A real man." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, the now familiar feeling of his father being present, being remembered, being honored by strangers who'd learned his story and decided it mattered. Reaper watched Marcus over the rim of his coffee cup. He'd watched this kid transform over the past 3 months, watched the desperation drain out of him and something stronger take its place. Not arrogance or hardness, but groundedness. The quality of someone who understands where he comes from and what he's capable of. "I've been thinking," Reaper said carefully, "about what comes next for you." Marcus looked up. They'd talked about this before, vaguely, in the way people talk about futures that haven't quite solidified into reality yet. But there was something different about Reaper's tone now, something more intentional. "I want to propose something," Reaper continued, "and I want you to think about it before you answer. No pressure, no obligation, but I think you should consider it." Diana refilled their cups again and drifted away, giving them privacy. "What?" Marcus asked. "An apprenticeship. Formal. With me at the garage. 3 years. You learn everything. Engines, frames, custom work, business management. You get paid. Real wages, not just hourly work. You build a trade. You become someone who can fix things, who can solve problems, who can build things that last." Reaper leaned back in the booth. "By the time you're 19, you could be part owner if you wanted it. You could have options. You could build something real." Marcus felt his throat tighten. An apprenticeship, a real path, not just surviving, but building. "What about school?" he asked. "You can finish high school at night if you want, or get your GED. You're smart enough, you'll pass it easy. But what I'm offering is something better than most schools can give you. It's real work, it's real money, it's learning from someone who cares about doing it right." Reaper picked up his coffee cup and held it, not drinking, just holding it. "And it means you're part of the crew. Officially. Not temporary, not charity work, part of the family." Marcus understood what Reaper was really saying. He was saying, "I'm not leaving, I'm here for the long term. I'm making good on my promise, not just to your father, but to you. We're building something here. I want that," Marcus said quietly. "Good," Reaper replied, and there was finality in his voice, relief, completion. They finished breakfast in companionable silence. Reaper paid. They left a generous tip for Diana. And then they walked back through the morning streets as the sun began to rise properly. That moment when darkness surrenders to light, when the whole city seems to take a breath and start again. That evening, Marcus called a meeting. Just the 4 people who mattered most. Reaper, Diana, his mother, and Mr. Jacobson, his former high school teacher who'd shown up on day 23 and kept showing up. They sat in the living room of the apartment, and Marcus stood, not nervously, but with purpose. "I want to tell you what I'm going to do," he said. "I'm going to work at the garage with Reaper, full-time apprenticeship. I'm going to finish my GED, and I'm going to build something with my hands, with my mind, with my commitment." He looked at each of them. "I'm doing this because my father did something that mattered. He did it even when it was dangerous, even when nobody was watching. He kept his word to Reaper, and that promise just saved my life and my mother's life. So I'm going to spend the rest of my life being someone who keeps promises too, being someone who shows up, being someone you can count on." Lynn had tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. Diana reached over and squeezed her hand. Reaper nodded, once, with the gravity of a man witnessing a vow being made. That night, Marcus wrote in his journal, "Day 90. Apprenticeship starts Monday. Real work, real future. Mum is safe. The garage is mine, not legally, not yet, but spiritually. This is my inheritance. Not money or stuff, but a code. Keep your word. Show up. Work with your whole heart. Help people. Loyalty matters. I'll never forget the 3 months that changed everything. The 743 people who showed up, the work they did, the lessons they taught. But more than that, I'll never forget the reason. Because Reaper kept a promise made in a desert 28 years ago to a man he loved like a brother. That's what I'm going to do. That's who I'm going to be." 2 weeks later, on what would have been James Chen's 57th birthday, Marcus went to the garage alone early in the morning. He sat on the bench where his father had once sat, where Reaper had pulled him from the burning truck in his dreams and nightmares for decades. He spoke out loud, even though there was nobody there to hear. "Dad, I'm going to keep working. I'm going to be someone you'd be proud of. I'm going to remember you. I'm going to tell your story. I'm going to keep Reaper's promise alive. I'm going to show up for people the way people showed up for me." And then he got to work. He picked up a wrench. He found the motorcycle that needed attention. He moved with purpose, with intention, with the understanding that every action he took now was part of a larger legacy, that he was part of a chain stretching backward to deserts and forward to futures yet unmade. His hands were strong. His mind was clear. His heart was full of the particular gratitude that only comes from being saved not by one person, but by an entire community of people who believed that loyalty matters, that promises aren't quaint relics of the past. They're the foundation of everything real. The work would never be finished. There would always be another motorcycle to repair, another person to help, another promise to keep. But that was the point. That was the whole beautiful, endless point. To keep working, to keep showing up, to keep the promises alive, because that's what makes us human. That's what makes us real. And that's what lasts. Would you like any additional adjustments to this extended version? Perhaps more emphasis on specific emotional moments, or additional dialogue with the characters?